This video was intended to be much longer, almost 10 hours long in fact. Due to unforeseen complications though, I'm instead going to upload it in a series of smaller parts. If you haven't seen part 1, I highly recommend you start there before continuing. Link in the description. Rin has a rather hefty introduction, an entire 50-minute long episode dedicated to her. From the first few interactions with other students, we can see that she's mostly liked, respected, and recognized. She's seen as a prodigy, even though she tends to oversleep. She's not afraid to talk back to someone when they upset her, but also smiles in place of glaring at those who offend her. Additionally, the student council president doesn't like her very much. I don't know why. These are just the interactions that show us who she is, but there's still more to learn about her. Kirei messages her that the deadline to enter is the following day. We learn that she hasn't acquired a catalyst yet and decides to summon a servant without one. She waits until 2 AM to conduct the summoning when her mana is at its peak, but she forgets her clocks were dialed back an hour and that it was actually 1 AM. She then scolds herself for failing an ideal summoning before meeting her servant, Archer. He is also dissatisfied with their pairing, angering Rin by refusing to do what she says and decides to fight how he wants to alone. In retaliation, Rin uses a command seal to compel him to obey her in every way, although because the command was vague in general, it doesn't take effect, thus having wasted it. But Archer acknowledges her abrasiveness anyways, and retracts his earlier statement, both acknowledging Rin's skill as a mage, while flattering her to garner forgiveness. Rin has very specific expectations regarding the master-servant relationship, and is very stubborn about her superiority to Archer. Despite this, she's still weak to flattery, and warms up to him not long after he accepts her as his master. The next morning, Rin wakes up to find that she's overslept, and instead decides to show Archer around the city. The two of them get to bond, and we learn a little bit more about Rin as they get to know each other. But already we've discerned quite a bit just from what we've seen so far. There are some things about her character that are fairly obvious, but there are also some other aspects that are subtle but not displayed as openly. Despite how others view her, Rin is a procrastinator. She not only admits to sleeping in often, but even does so in this very episode. She waits until the last possible day to make a summoning, and has no success in locating a catalyst despite having years to prepare. This also complements another notable flaw of hers. She's not very smart. Presumably not stupid, given how both Archer and her peers view her. She cares about appearances and is aware of her flaws and how to hide them. This could also be why she smiles in place of a glare, giving the impression that it's been drilled into her not to overreact to trivial things, but it is in no way sincere, and people have learned to view it as disgust. But most telling of all is how her eagerness can get in the way of her ability to address a situation. Despite being trained her entire life to be a participant of the Grail War, she's ignorant on how command seals work, and wastes one immediately out of sheer anger. She attempts a summoning without a catalyst, something that is technically impossible, leaving her summon entirely to chance, regardless of the importance to her that she know what servant she's fighting with, so as to strategize appropriately. Finally, and most telling about her motivations, she doesn't have a wish to ask the Grail. Not one like the other masters. Rin only wants the Grail, and the glory to her family name that comes with it. Victory is all that matters to her, and it's so important to her that the Grail saw it as a suitable desire to choose her as a master. There's so much that we've learned in only half an hour, and there's still more yet to come. When she returns to the school the following morning, she detects the hints of a magical barrier. After school, she investigates and finds 7 magic circles that form the barrier. She then determines that its function is to consume the souls of all humans within it. But before she can destroy it, Lancer appears and a fight ensues. This will later lead to the first issue with her character. After the fight is over, Rin completely overlooks the barrier for the next 3 days. This goes beyond a simple mistake. Given the disdain that she expresses over using such tactics, it's uncharacteristic of her to be so uncaring about something so dangerous. Now, it is possible that she did take down the sigils before leaving, and the opposing master simply put them back up the following day. Later, however, she affirmed that erasing the sigils would force the enemy master to reveal themselves. This never happens, so we have no reason to assume that she erased any of them. Before the fight officially concludes, Lancer spots a witness and chases after him. She attempts to rescue him, but they're too late. Initially, she decides only to comfort him until his death, but when learning that the student is Shiro Emiya, someone who she cared for personally, she instead uses a powerful gem to heal his injuries. Despite the fact that these two characters appear distant from one another, Rin demonstrates a great care for Shiro's well-being, and it doesn't end here either. Before the episode ends, she realizes that Lancer might still try to kill Shiro one more time when he learns he's alive, yet another consistency with her vice to look past crucial information. She leaves to rescue him yet again, only to find that he's summoned the final servant, Saber. Rin is distraught that Shiro managed to summon Saber and not her, but she's willing to overlook it to teach him the ropes. She takes him to the church to speak with Kirei in order to properly explain the Grail War. It's unclear why she can't do this herself. Equally confusing is why she wants an excuse to see Kirei when she doesn't like him. She ignores his offers to come see him and even hangs up on him when discussing her father. This by itself is also confusing because Kirei has been taking care of her for the past 10 years, and yet she's so needlessly ungrateful to him. After they leave the church, we learn a little bit more. When Archer suggests that they ought to eliminate Shiro, she counters by saying that she owes him a debt for preventing Saber from killing them earlier. Afterwards, Ilya and Berserker appear to engage them. Rin wants Shiro to leave the battle and gets frustrated when he doesn't. She knows he will only get himself hurt, since he isn't a trained mage. The two do end up surviving the encounter, but Shiro suffers a grave injury just as Rin had predicted. The following morning, Shiro thanks her for saving him, to which she corrects that they aren't allies, but he maintains his trust anyways. We can see from these interactions in episodes 2 and 3 just how much Rin cares for Shiro. She said that she did all of this, set up the meeting with Kirei, and saved his life from Ilya, because she's in debt to him. But this is obviously a lie. Archer couldn't have lost to Saber so easily. This is not only evident by Archer's strength, but also confirmed in the season finale.
初めてセイバーと会った時、手を抜いていたでしょ。いくらセイバーが強いって言っても、守り上手なあなたが倒されるとは思えないのよね。
Further, she saved his life barely a couple hours earlier, and at the cost of an irreplaceable gem. He is in greater debt to her. She even changes her story the following morning. Instead of sparing his life because of the debt she owes him, it's now because killing him in his sleep would be unfair. She can't keep her story straight. Her tendency to overlook small details is impacting her ability to sound truthful, but she doesn't want to reveal her true motives. She cares for Shiro. She wants to see him succeed and not get hurt, and what's great about this is that it's communicated rather naturally. All of it's very subtle and plays off of the characteristics we already know about her. Except for one detail. Why does she want Shiro in the war? I want you to really think about that question, because we will be coming back to it. Rin wants to make up for what happened and goes out to hunt another servant. She finds a string of gas leaks caused by Castor and decides to go after her. This plays into another equally important attribute of her character. She cares greatly for innocent civilians and doesn't want outsiders to get hurt. Archer doesn't approve and again suggests that they go after Shiro since he's the easiest target. Rin again tries avoiding the idea, but promises to kill Shiro anyways if she needs to. The following morning, Rin is surprised to see Shiro at school without Saber. She thinks it's incredibly foolish to walk around in public, especially when he knows an enemy master is nearby. This comes off as hypocritical considering that she also chose to send Archer away when there's no reason to. After everyone else leaves, she challenges Shiro to a fight and appears to make an active effort to kill him. We can't assume that she's trying to, especially after she's tried so hard to keep him alive up until now. What's more likely is that she's trying to teach Shiro how to act cautiously and understand the consequences of not doing so, albeit in a more Terrence Fletcher teaching method. Conceptually this makes sense, but her attempt is rather extreme. Rin has no understanding of Shiro's skill as a mage, and also knows that basic tasks are far beyond him.
あなただってそうでしょ。
いや、俺はこんなことできないから。
できないって、そんなことないでしょ。ガラスの扱いなんて初歩の初歩だもの。
Yet she goes many steps beyond simply trying to rough him up. At one point in the fight, she traps Shiro inside one of the classrooms, then bombards the inside and annihilates everything else in the room, before tossing a grenade in for good measure. Based on the aftermath, this attack had the capacity to easily injure or even kill him. She has no way of knowing Shiro is even capable of hardening magic, yet she displays no signs of holding back. Whether intentionally or not, she is no longer testing him, but actively trying to kill him.
Bitch!
If this is simply meant to be the tsundere archetype taken to its extreme, it's very damaging to her character. The fight abruptly ends when they hear screaming outside and Shiro rushes after it. Rin again prioritizes the safety of outsiders and waits to re-engage until the matter is resolved. They find a girl lying on the ground, completely drained of mana. Before they can do anything, however, another servant attacks Rin from the bushes. This is where Rin's decision to send Archer home truly becomes much worse than an unexplained decision. There is no explanation why she sent Archer away, and if she hadn't, this would have never happened in the first place. In fact, it's possible that he could have eliminated Ryder on his own, further preventing events yet to come. Shiro intercepts the attack just in time and rushes into the woods after the servant. Rin remains behind to tend to the girl, then follows after them to rescue Shiro. Ryder retreats and Rin insists on tending to Shiro's wounds. Before she can, however, he counter-suggests that they finish their fight. He has no chance of winning whatsoever. He is out in the open, fighting an opponent who is many times more skilled than he is in magecraft, and doing so both handicapped and bleeding out from a massive hole in his arm. She could easily defeat him if she wanted. Her attempt to make Shiro more self-conscious seems to have failed. So long as he's out in the open, any master that happens upon him could come out and attack him just like she did. And if he treated them as seriously as he did Rin, his life would be put in more danger. He's learned nothing from this encounter. She knows now that no matter how much danger he's in, Shiro will disregard it. Hey, do you guys remember that question I asked you earlier? This could be what inspires her to form an alliance. She uses Shiro's act of heroism as a means to justify the proposal, but we know that she's lied about her feelings before. More than likely she's doing this because she knows he won't last very long otherwise. Making an ally of him will not only benefit her, but also keep him safe. They conclude that another master must be going to their school due to the attack. Shiro accepts the temporary alliance until the master at school is dealt with. The episode ends on a rather interesting note. Rin draws attention to Shiro's lacking skill as a mage. When she learns that it's because Shiro's father never properly prepared him for magic, she concludes that it's because Kiritsuku prioritized parenting over training Shiro. It's this value of parental guidance over magical training that Rin takes issue with, something that should become more important later on. The following afternoon, the two reconvene after class to talk about how to possibly identify the master at school, and their options are fairly limited. During their talk, Shiro uncovers one of the circles that made up the bounded field found earlier. They erase the ones that they can find, hopefully along with the 7 that Rin had found 3 days ago, but some still remain, keeping the bounded field up. Afterwards, they decide to call it a night and plan to confront the enemy master tomorrow. While it's a good idea for them to use the sigils as bait, the lack of urgency they display is incredibly out of character for both of them. They should be aware of the destructive capabilities that the field would have were it activated. Despite this, they're both content with leaving without having located the remaining sigils, and we don't even know why they're leaving the job unfinished either. It can't be a time constraint, because Rin has stayed past late on 2 separate occasions, one of which didn't even prevent her from still going to school the following morning. She could just as easily have Archer search the premises for them. He'd be just as effective at locating the sigils as Shiro, if not even better, and conducting this search undetected also means he can stand watch in case the master returns, which would be likely since they're more inclined to put the sigils back up when the school is empty. But this isn't even an excuse. Time should not be an issue for her. We are talking about the lives of hundreds of innocent students needlessly put at risk. Even if it took all night, no amount of classes missed should be more pressing to her than saving them. If for some reason they're unable to remove it any more than partially, that's all the less reason to do anything other than stake out the school. Because if defeating the master is the only way to stop it, they need to focus their efforts on locating where that master will appear next, rather than damaging a bounded field that they know could easily be replaced while no one is around. Where else to locate where this master will appear next but the sigils that they'll supposedly be managing? She treats the idea of a soul-sucking magical field placed around her school with very little regard, and it's almost gone unaddressed for 3 days since its discovery. But it gets worse. The next morning, Rin hears about Shiro's kidnapping the night before, and how Archer tried to kill him. She uses another command seal to compel him not to attack Shiro so long as they're allied. She also uses the grudge between Shiro and Archer to justify leaving him at home. Again, with only 1 command seal left. And while Shiro still doesn't bring Saber with him. and it goes exactly how you'd expect. At some unnamed time that day, Shinji reveals himself as the enemy master and offers his own alliance to Rin. Given that she's already allied with Shiro, this would mean that just under half of all competing masters would be part of her team. If they were to fight Berserker again with an additional servant, it could only help their chances. Even if he wasn't that valuable enough to consider it, she could at least barter with him. Like, agree to the alliance only under the condition that he remove the bounded field. Though, for some reason, she doesn't suspect that he put up the bounded field because Shinji sucks at magecraft, completely ignoring that the field could have been put up by his servant, or at the very least she could ask if he knew the master who did put it up. However, she doesn't think this through and not only turns down Shinji's offer, but taunts him with her own alliance with Shiro, instigating what happens next. In retaliation for being turned down, Shinji activates the bounded field, which begins to siphon the souls of everyone within the area. Just after, Caster has her golems appear, likely to defend Kuzuki. Shiro calls Saber to combat them while they find Shinji to take down the barrier. But when they do, they find him cowering in the corner of a hallway, and the corpse of his servant in the classroom. After Rider dematerializes, the field slowly disappears. Rin tries forcing him to tell them who defeated Rider, but Shinji doesn't answer. Instead of keeping him at gunpoint, however, and continuing to press him for answers, she lets him escape. This is also out of character, given how eager she was to shoot him just to take down the barrier. We know that she has no tolerance for a master that tries to use outsiders as an energy source like Caster did. She takes almost no issue with Shinji's strategy. She's not even completely sure that everyone in the building is fine until many hours after Shinji escaped. Even if her threats were just bluffs, letting him off so easily is out of character to say the least. Furthermore, whoever defeated Rider could be very powerful. Learning as much about them would be a priority. Even if she had no intention of hurting Shinji, simply letting him go wouldn't help them in any way, and the lack of information would later hurt them when they confront Kuzuki. Without anything else to do, Shiro and Rin gather up the students to check if they're alive. What's strange is her reaction to the sheer number of bodies around them. It's rather uncharacteristic of her behavior in episode 4, when she also found unconscious bodies in another building while looking for Caster. She even says that she couldn't check all of the bodies like Shiro did. Does that mean that she didn't bother checking if anyone was alive in episode 4? It's primarily meant to draw attention to how Shiro is used to being around bodies, but that can be accomplished without contradicting her character. What's equally strange is Rin's reaction to the harm inflicted on her half-sister, Sakura. During the commotion when the barrier went up, Shiro immediately rushed after Sakura to see if she's safe, yet Rin reacts with almost no urgency whatsoever. The anime is suggesting that Rin cares that Sakura was possibly hurt by the ordeal, but not while the ordeal is happening. After the students are taken care of, Archer arrives to get informed on recent events. He's even scolded by Rin, even though it was her decision to leave him behind.
Bitch!
They determine that Caster's master must also go to this school as well, given how quickly Caster was able to respond. What's strange is that none of them address the matter of Rider's assailant. Saber confirms that the real Caster was never here, and all of the golems they fought were too easy to be able to kill Rider. This means that someone or something else was also at the school, powerful enough to kill a servant. Perhaps the servant of a fifth master that also goes to this school. Because there wouldn't be an immediate reason to assume anything other than a servant could have defeated Rider. Yet. But Rin never addresses it. She is completely apathetic about the evidence pointing to another possible servant, instead focusing her efforts on Caster exclusively. Regardless, the two prepare to make steps on how to identify the fourth master later. All the while, Rin grows somewhat more suspicious of Archer's actions. Before now, her three main character traits have been kept mostly consistent, with only some exceptions. Those being her concealed love of Shiro, her disdain for the involvement of outsiders, and her ability to make relatively smart decisions despite her analytical clumsiness. Her decision-making is put severely in question when she yet again sends Archer away, a decision that arguably could have prevented Shiro from having to use one of his command seals and further mitigating the damage that day. She ignores valuable advantages and bargaining opportunities when turning down yet another master that offers an alliance, instigating retaliation from a clearly insecure and emotionally unstable child. Even if an alliance was out of the question, it is especially damaging that it is never considered, and she never once considers that Ryder was defeated by another servant. She even drops the discussion on the assailant altogether and allows Shinji to escape without learning more about them, in spite of how much she despises people who use people as energy sources, much like what motivated her decision to go after Castor. This is also a contradiction to her care for outsiders. Even when it isn't advantageous, she'll ignore all logic to combat those that would involve them, but she allows Shinji to escape and holds no grudges for what he attempted to do, before learning if anyone had even survived. And of course, her lacking initiative to realize that her own sister was in danger also contradicts this as well. While I wish I could say that this is the worst her character suffers, it only spirals downward from here. The next day, they determine Issei, the student council president I mentioned earlier, could potentially be the fourth master. Without any other suspects, Shiro offers to check, then report his findings later. After school, Rin leaves to check up on Sakura just before Shiro arrives, only to find a foreigner waiting outside. The two hide so as not to be seen until the man walks away shortly after. Rin recognizes him as someone whom talked to Sakura before, but is put off to see him following her yet again. It never concerns her enough that her half-sister has a stalker, at least not enough to confront him, and doesn't recognize him later. She then changes the topic and asks Shiro what he's doing here. Not getting the verbal answer she wants, Rin can tell that Shiro cares about Sakura, as evident by his visit to her house, and grins at the idea, which is somewhat odd. She doesn't take displeasure at the idea that Shiro might have feelings for another girl. She has a similar reaction in episode 2 with Saber in place of Sakura. This could be an indicator that she's in denial about having feelings about him, or at least unaware of them, but this also seems counter to her behavior and all of the times when her feelings are so openly displayed. Now even her motivations regarding Shiro are somewhat askew. The two find out their suspicions were false and plan to find another suspect tomorrow. That night, Rin has a dream about Archer's past. After waking, she's confronted by her servant, who once again expresses his low opinion of Shiro as an ally. Further, he suggests that Castor would have been a better ally, saying she embodies the virtues of a true mage, valuing results above all else. I would bring up the number of times this is false, but I won't repeat points already made in Castor's section. In any case, she won't compromise, and Archer reluctantly backs away from the topic before she leaves. Later at school, she overhears Shiro and Issei talking about one of the teachers, Mr. Kuzuki. They learn he's been living at Ryoto Temple with Issei and his family. When they confront him on the matter of his older brother, he tells them that Kuzuki is going to be married to a woman he met 2 weeks ago, possibly Castor. They plan to test Kuzuki on his way home that night to see if he's a master. Saber asks why Archer isn't around.
あいつなら置いてきた。あいつとキャスターを合わせたくないのよ。
This echoes the distrust she had 2 nights ago, though she doesn't explain why she feels that way.
どういうことだよ。
急ぎましょう。
Given their talk that morning, the attempts on Shiro's life, and her general skepticism, the anime seems to be hinting that she believes Archer may try to betray her and make a deal with Castor instead. But there's no reason to believe he has the means to do this. She doesn't know about Castor's noble phantasm yet, and Archer can't leave their pact so long as she has command over him. She can't possibly know any way for Archer to leave her unless she either uses her last command seal or she dies. And despite her lack of trust, she doesn't distrust him enough to believe that he'd try to kill her. But we're never told explicitly why she doesn't bring Archer, and given past experiences, it's only led to more problems. Even if the possibility of failing again wasn't enough, even if her own distrust of Archer was at all plausible, it's becoming significantly less justifiable to make this decision again and again. Based on what Rin and Shiro know this time, they suspect both Kuzuki and Assassin are employed by Castor. If they were to attack Kuzuki, it's reasonable to assume that both servants would arrive to protect him. And given that neither Saber nor Archer could finish Assassin, it would be extremely unwise to confront him with only one servant. Especially now, since Shiro is getting roped into the consequences of her poor decisions yet again. Still thinking about that question I asked earlier? While it's true that Assassin can't leave Ryoto Temple, neither Rin nor Shiro know this. They have every reason to assume that 2 servants will show up that night. But the biggest stroke of ignorance on Rin's part is that she had originally planned to attack Kuzuki alone, meaning she was willing to enter a battle with another master entirely by herself with the possibility that 1 or 2 servants would come to defend him. Needless to say, this is quite possibly the stupidest mistake Rin makes, and it is far too dumb a choice to fit with her character. Rin knows this is their only chance to get a surprise attack on them. If they fail, Castor will hold up in Ryoto Temple from then on. Not only is there no reason not to bring Archer, but bringing him would be a far better decision that outweighs any lacking trust Rin has in him. The ambush pays off exactly as planned, and Kuzuki reveals himself as the master, just as Castor arrives to rescue him. A fight ensues where Saber and Rin are momentarily knocked out, and Shiro barely fends off Kuzuki with projection magic. Saber eventually recovers and forces the two to retreat. This is the third time that Rin should have brought Archer with her, was unjustified in not doing so, and resulted in events that could have been prevented or mitigated if she had. Yet she refuses to learn from past mistakes, and continues to make new ones. The two meet the next day to discuss how they'll go about combating Castor. Knowing that the temple is warded against servants, the only way to enter or exit would be through the front gate. Rin also suspects that Castor might try to blow up the temple if they were to corner her, but we don't know why she'd think that. Castor didn't try doing that the last time she was cornered by Archer, and Rin had only met her the night before. She has no reason to assume anything about her tactics. Beyond this, the three never discuss anything about their strategy. Instead, Rin tries to further strengthen her relationship with Shiro by talking about their training in magecraft. Rin didn't have very much trouble learning about magic and actively sought out ways to expand her knowledge in the craft, but Shiro said that he only wanted to take up magecraft so that he could help others. He never saw magic as a fun tool he could use for himself, or even felt deserving of it. From this, Rin is inspired to introduce more fun into Shiro's life. Though her affection has been clear, she seems much less concerned about hiding it at this point. Up until now, she's gone out of her way to drown any reasonable suspicion that she cared for him. It's only after she hears what Shiro thinks of magic that she decides to stop hiding and instead makes an active effort in making him happy. For as far as we've gotten into this anime, this is the first time we've heard of this from Rin. It seems the idea of using magecraft for one's own benefit is one that Rin holds very closely. That the thought of a mage using their abilities exclusively to help others is practically alien to her. This speaks further to how Rin's family extols the art of magecraft, reinforcing their last talk with Rin denouncing Shiro's father because he focused on parenting above training. We're slowly learning a bit more about Rin's background, specifically about her upbringing and what her family was like. It's also worth noting that, at this point, we've not seen either of Rin's parents, and it's been hinted before that they're both dead. And yet we still don't have enough information to draw any other conclusion beyond this. Much like her behavior that morning, Rin is much more open about her feelings during the date. She wants him to be happy, and she's even willing to be more forthcoming about her feelings in order to do so. Once she feels that Shiro is feeling better, however, she immediately reverts back to denying those feelings. The scene even ends on her blushing at the very thought that any of this was done because she was worried about him, even though she already confirmed this. Bladeworks has some conflicting ideas about how it wants to present Rin's devotion to Shiro. She'll resort to using a powerful artifact to save his life, but then try to kill him with a spell she can't possibly know he'll survive. She's self-conscious of her crush on Shiro, yet takes no issue with the possibility that he might like another girl. And now, when she feels obligated to be more open about her feelings, she denies ever having gone out with him for that very reason she told him about the night before. Love is a very hard thing to fully quantify into words when it comes to writing, mostly because it's something that can be just as in conflict with itself as human nature is. The issue here is that there doesn't appear to be an inner conflict regarding Rin's feelings, leaving only actions in direct opposition with one another. She wants to protect Shiro, but has no problem potentially killing him for an unrelated reason. She has feelings for him, but reacts gleefully to the idea that he may have feelings for another. She wants to be open about her feelings and put them on display to help Shiro feel better, then denies those feelings when they're noticed. Later it starts to rain and the two have to cancel the rest of their plans for the day. Rin then asks Shiro what he thought of the date. She's upset that she can't get him to admit that he had fun, even though his response wasn't denying that he had fun, but regardless, they're attacked by Castor before they can resolve the argument. She lured them into a bounded field with an army of unkillable familiars that surrounded them. She's also taken Shiro's guardian, Miss Fujine, as a hostage and uses her as a bargaining chip to win over Shiro's loyalty. To further appeal to his nature, she promises him the Grail if he serves her, stating that he has every right to claim it for himself for all that it's done to him in the past, destroying his life, being adopted by a former master for the sole purpose of fighting in the next war, and having magic training forced on him. This is what she said. However, Rin should know that none of this is true, which does sort of undercut the emotional impact of the scene and makes the tone somewhat forced by implying that this was some sort of truth that was hidden from her when it was anything but. The reveal should be focusing on how Shiro was a survivor from the previous war, as that is the only significant information presented at this moment. Instead, false information is thrown into the mix, which even Castor couldn't possibly know is true, making it seem that Rin should instead be a little skeptical if this is more of Castor's manipulation games at work. Shiro still refuses, but instead offers his command seals in exchange for Fujine. Rin insists that Shiro doesn't have to be so selfless in order to help others, but he continues to remain stubborn. Castor is successful and gains control over Saber, then orders her to kill Rin. Shiro, once again, steps in to take the blow for her, just before Archer breaks through and rescues them both. The two manage to escape to Rin's mansion, albeit just barely. Shiro rests for his injuries to heal, while Rin and Archer plan to attack Castor before she gets to use Saber. Archer is in full agreement of the plan, until he learns that Rin has no intention of breaking her alliance. Though she'll reject his advances, she refuses to give up on Shiro until he says he wants to quit. This is something that has routinely made little sense about her character. Rin specifically made a temporary alliance until they found the other master at their school and dealt with them. All Rin has left to do is defeat Castor, and the conditions for their alliance will be met, but there are so many other relevant factors which she takes no consideration of. The most notable of which is that, if Shiro rejoins the war, the two will eventually have to fight. She's continuously proven unable to muster the will to kill him, even when her actions show otherwise. If she doesn't want to fight him, she can't keep helping and must allow him to be disqualified. And if Rin were to succeed in bringing Shiro back into the fight, his next elimination might actually kill him. Shiro's well-being is incredibly important to her. The gem she saved his life with, her alliance, and even her attack at the school were all choices made out of love for him. In some form or another. Yet Shiro routinely throws himself into the harshest parts of the fight, even against his own well-being. He's constantly suffering and faced with death on multiple occasions because he refuses to see how outmatched he is. She's seen firsthand the lengths that Shiro will go to in order to help those around him. Something that she doesn't want him to do, but he will. And Rin knows this, and every time it has resulted in Shiro getting injured, stabbed, slashed, beaten, impaled, even killed. He will only keep getting up again and again until he can't. The safest place he could possibly be is if he were removed from the war. And given how much she doesn't want to involve innocent bystanders, which she described Shiro as back in episode 0,
私たちには関係のない一般人よ。
she should have every reasonable motivation to want to keep him from rejoining the war.
Total bitch.
Up until now, the largest contradiction with Rin's character has been between how other characters view her and how the writing portrays her. Everyone else around her sees her as someone incredibly talented as either a student or a mage. Even Archer describes her as someone who doesn't make mistakes.
できる者もいればできない者もいる。とりわけ君は前者だ。その手の人間はまず過ちなど起こさないし、自らの過ちなど考えることもない。
Excuse me, the fuck did you just say?
But this is a contradiction to the most core motivations of her character. And this has been true as far back as episode 2. She could have encouraged him to quit the war, just like he had wanted. There is never a moment when she considers involving Shiro the same as involving an outsider. And there's still one important factor that she's left unaddressed. One regarding Archer and his questionable loyalty. Rin rests before the next day to attack Castor, who'd taken refuge in Kirei's church. Once they arrive, Rin plans to attack head-on while Archer battles Kuzuki. Archer objects for the most obvious reason that servants are more powerful than mages. Rin counters, suggesting that she thinks she can take her, but doesn't say why. The fight begins, but as soon as Archer has the opportunity, he knocks Rin back and offers his loyalty to Castor. This is one of the more telling contradictions to Rin's character. Based on what we've seen twice before, she suspected Archer's loyalty for the last several days. It was only 2 nights ago that she specifically said she didn't want Archer to be around Castor. There's little else that we're told why she would think this way if she didn't believe Archer could betray her. And now, after learning about Rulebreaker, she has no concerns that he would allow Castor to sever his pact. She makes no attempt to address any of her other grievances with him, nor does she have any intention to talk through these issues and resolve any underlying conflicts. In fact, she goes out of her way to shoot down any general objections he has. yet she repeatedly acts as though she never suspected for a moment that he would betray her. But possibly the worst example of her apathy is her inaction when he finally does. Rin has a single command seal left. She knows that once Archer joins Caster, she'll lose that seal. We also know that it doesn't take very much effort for a command seal to take effect. Command seals can even be activated by accident and can be issued non-verbally. There's nothing stopping her from simply commanding Archer to kill Caster before it even happens. Even better still, she could have used the command seal before the fight even happened, commanding him to kill Caster before she uses Rule Breaker on him. True, this means that Archer is free from her control and capable of betraying her, but they would have dealt with Caster and allowed Saber to forge a new pact. After freeing Archer from his pact, Shiro appears, attacks Kuzuki, but fails to land a decent hit. Caster quickly corners them, but Archer convinces her to let them leave as a condition of his surrender. Rin swears that she'll not only defeat Caster, but get Archer back after the fact. As the two leave the premises, Rin scolds Shiro for coming to rescue her. He shrugs off her concerns and notes how she's in more pain than he is, which brings her to tears. It saddens me that beneath the tangled mess of Rin's character, there is something of interest, an arc that has the potential to play perfectly with her romantic interest in Shiro. She starts saying that she could have defeated Caster when she had the chance, a claim that's not entirely untrue. She further explains that she tends to mess up on very important decisions, also not untrue. We've seen many times that Rin is very prone to making mistakes, sometimes even large ones. Imperfections are a crucial part of her character, and some have been plausible in the universe, but others have gone beyond the realm of common mistakes. The number of times that the writing has often been contrived and even contradictory regarding her flaws ruin a large potential her character could have had. The two confess their feelings and regroup at Shiro's house to strategize their next play. Without a servant, they won't be able to fight against Caster, so they decide to turn to Ilia for an alliance and go to her mansion, only to find her engaged with another servant when they arrived. Not long after, Ilia and Berserker are eliminated by the servant, Gilgamesh. Hoping to save her, albeit too late, Shiro gives away their position. Before Gilgamesh kills them, Shinji appears, revealing himself as the master. Rin attempts to bargain by threatening Shinji. As a counter, Gilgamesh offers an alliance with Rin, but she refuses on the grounds that she doesn't want to ally herself with a master who serves his servant. As much as neither Rin nor Shiro want to ally with Shinji, the fact that Rin was so quick to dismiss him once again demonstrates a lack of urgency on her part. Out of the two remaining servants left in the war, Berserker was the only one whose master they knew where to find. For all either of them know, they'll never be able to find Lancer or his master. This might be their only chance to ally not just with a servant strong enough to defeat Caster, but one even stronger than they had originally planned, one who offers an alliance without resistance. Whereas they had no idea Ilia wouldn't try to kill them like she had before. There is no consideration or hesitation on Rin's part. She refuses them as though there's some other alternative to fighting Caster, as though they aren't already in a desperate situation. And it gives the impression that she's either ignorant of the situation they're in, or that she doesn't care. If it has something to do with the fact that he killed Ilia, Gilgamesh is no more evil than her for all Rin knows. So even that isn't a reason enough to turn them down. There's hardly anything he's done that Ilia hadn't already planned to do, if not done already. Killing masters is the role of a master. We know this. Rin herself had tried to kill Ilia. Ilia could have already killed a master or two before this. In fact, they don't know if Ilia hadn't already killed Lancer since their last encounter more than a week ago. Because that would make sense. The biggest difference here is that Rin would rather try her luck with a master that tried to kill her than one that openly offers a truce without resistance.
Bitch.
After Shinji and Gilgamesh leave the scene, Rin scolds Shiro for nearly getting himself killed. She further suggests that it's messed up for him to want to do something like that for such a selfless reason. This is a rather touching scene that shows Rin cares that Shiro is so selfless, but still worried that his behavior is also self-destructive. It does lean a little too hard on the never be selfless at all side, since this is really the only line that delineates that from what's being said, but at least that distinction is made. Sometime later, Lancer appears and offers an alliance. Rin and Shiro are skeptical and even somewhat averse to the idea of partnering with a servant that tried to kill Shiro twice already. Strange that this is even a contention, when Ilia tried to kill both of them, but that's beside the point. What's most questionable is, once again, their lack of urgency. Yet another servant offers an alliance to them, and they almost reject it as though they have a choice. Neither of them remember that Lancer is the only servant left that they can choose that isn't either dead or working for Castor. It never crosses Rin's mind that they're so desperate for help that Lancer is the only option that they have left. After they agree to ally themselves, they plan to attack the church later that night. Lancer will distract Archer while Shiro and Rin go inside. Rin fights Castor while Shiro battles Kuzuki. Both know that they're completely outmatched. The best they can do is stall for time until Rin can come up with a plan to defeat Castor. This scene is the first time Rin has to solve a problem entirely through her own intellect, creativity, and wit. And it reflects greatly on how smart her character really is. That is to say, not very much at all. Rin's plan is to catch Castor by surprise by switching to hand-to-hand combat after distracting her long enough to get within punching range. That's it.
No, that's good. I just want to know, make sure that's where we're going with that.
We've already discussed why this shouldn't work, but there are more problems that could arise that she never considers. For starters, she places a lot of faith in the idea that Castor will simply land long enough for her to attack. The advantage Castor gains from flight is that she's less susceptible to close-range attacks. There's no reason she should land for all the reasons I mentioned earlier in Castor's section. By now, there's enough to conclude that Rin is extremely unintelligent. She's actively hostile towards any servant trying to offer her help, and turns down the one that would be the best to help them fight Castor. She takes no consideration that Saber could be used against them, and her only plan is centered around ignoring that fact. And finally, said plan is based around winning by pure luck, hoping that Castor happens to underestimate them so greatly while also forgetting fundamental information on mages. Somehow, her plan succeeds, and even then, they still lose the fight. Kuzuki steps in just before Rin can take the kill, and the two plan to have Saber finish them just before Archer steps in and executes them both. The two manage to win the fight, not because of any sort of well-thought-out strategy, but because they were lucky.
Whatever, you little bitch.
Archer overwhelms Saber, but Rin forms a new pact with her, allowing them a fighting chance. Archer distracts the three of them before kidnapping Rin and retreating. He plans to leverage a final uninterrupted battle with Shiro that morning. She awakens tied to a chair in the ruins of the Einsburn castle. There, she has an opportunity to reconcile with Archer and discusses his motivations. Later, Shinji arrives with Gilgamesh to retrieve Rin, but Archer insists that he has to finish his business with Shiro. Shinji agrees and begins to be Shinji. Meanwhile, Rin had already reached peak idiocy before, but this is where it passes the limit. She is well aware of the kind of person Shinji is. He instigated a soul-crushing bounded field just to spite Rin for not joining in an alliance. She knows he's fucking crazy and will her if given the chance. Later, Kirei arrives to remove her heart so that he can use her as the vessel for the Grail. And after that, Shinji further tries to her before strangling her violently on the floor. But at no point does she consider using her command seals to summon Saber.
You did not have to do that. You knew you did not have to do that. How could you have done that? Can you live with yourself?
Even if not for the command seals, it's hard to believe that she has no method of escape. She's a mage and is only being held by simple rope. She doesn't consider using physical enhancement magic to try to force her way out of the rope. She doesn't try using Gundo to burn through the rope. Even without any gems, there are still ways in which Rin could attempt to escape, but never even tries. It is quite possibly the greatest example of how stupid her character really is, and how little self-awareness is displayed. There shouldn't be much else that needs to be said that hasn't already. Her character is one that starts off with relatively consistent traits and attributes, but the series continues to treat her the opposite of how she's presented. She repeatedly makes decisions that are far too out of character for her to make. Despite being treated as an intelligent person by most everyone around her, she makes mistakes that are too dumb to be made at all. She's motivated by Shiro and has a strong compassion for him, yet her decisions repeatedly result in him getting hurt. Whether it's leaving Archer at home for no reason, repeatedly involving him in the war, and arguably leading to Archer's betrayal, or even when she tries to fucking murder him. None of these are in character. However, only the mistakes, too inconsistent for her to have made at all, are the ones worth criticizing. There are plenty, especially within the first episode, that seem plausible, and it's not unlikely that this was intentional, given that mistakes are a part of her character. But the arc that could have been is one that's poorly developed and left to the wayside, an arc that pertains heavily to her relationship with her father, something that I've been deliberately ignoring until now, mostly because it's hardly been important. not even at the moment of Kirei's reveal. Her relationship with her father is not only important because of the reveal of his murderer, but also because it pertains to another important character trait of hers, her fallibility. We know her father was a mage first and a parent second, the opposite of Shiro's father. Her family extolled magic and its teaching, and we see that even more when we're told how much Rin had an aptitude for the craft and always tried learning more. The problem with this, and many other times when characters describe her intellect, is that her behavior rarely reflects that same level of intelligence. She repeatedly makes mistakes that someone who had trained the past 10 years shouldn't have. And while much of this is certainly an issue with execution, as I've implied, it's hardly fair to say that her character can't make mistakes. I believe that there's an arc that could have come of Unlimited Blade Works that was never realized, and it has to do with her relationship with her father. But since there's so little of said relationship to see, let's examine her father, Tokiomi Tohsaka. Much like Kirei's introduction in Blade Works, Tokiomi's initial appearance isn't really an introduction to his character, but rather the concepts of the Holy Grail War, complete with overdramatic encirclement. The most important piece of information we gather here is Tokiomi's motivation and his reason for seeking the Grail.
根源への到達。我ら遠坂の悲願はその一点において他はない。
It's not explained in Zero what the root actually is, or what reason someone would have to want it. There are some speculations that can be made based only on what's shown to us here, but luckily we'll find out that it isn't really important to know. Besides taking on the role of Kirei's teacher, there isn't much else to learn about his character that wouldn't just be left to speculation. We learn a bit more about him in the next scene while he waits for reports to come in about the other masters. Given that we're still within the confines of Tokiomi's home, there's a bit that we can learn about his character simply from this room. He is extremely archetypal as a mage. We can see his workshop, office, basement, torture chamber is lit exclusively by candle. No electricity or any form of device that post-dates the 19th century can be seen. We can even see from other mages like Kiritsugu and Kaneth that the usage of such archaic methods are not commonplace. These same devices were likely used by many generations of his family before him. This supports the Tohsaka's value of tradition, regardless of their age. Further, we can tell that he's extremely confident. Though this is already evident based on the tone and posturing of his first appearance, he doesn't give nearly as much thought to Kiritsugu Emiya as his apprentice does, only briefly reading over the report on him before leaving Kirei to himself, and this confidence is all but reinforced during the summoning of his servant.
この戦い、我々の勝利だ。
He is so sure of himself that he will succeed with an incredibly powerful servant on their side, so confident in fact that he only ever leaves his home twice. For virtually the entire anime, Tokiomi is certain that he can remain within his conspicuous mansion for all to see, though we can tell at least some of that confidence comes from the strength in the servant protecting him. About 24 hours after Assassin's elimination, the first official fight of the Grail War ensues. Kirei and Tokiomi observe the fight from afar until Archer joins in. Eventually, he uses a command seal to order Archer to retreat. While unlikely Archer would have been defeated, Tokiomi doesn't appear to want to take risks. He would rather try to stick as close to his plan he's already enacted than see how something unexpected might play out, even if it risks damaging his relationship with his servant. Sometime later, Assassin reports about Castor, and Risei places the bounty. He describes it almost as an obligation to protect the secrets of magic from being uncovered. Furthermore, he views this as a potential advantage. Were Archer to be the one to eliminate Castor, Tokiomi could regain the command seal he had already used in the first battle. About a day and a half later, Kirei reports that Assassin has been discovered, albeit while also discovering that Ryder's master is merely a third-rate mage. The two further plan to test Ryder's abilities later that night, so they can tell just how powerful the two of them are in total. And just as planned, they learn exactly what Ryder's noble phantasm is, though it again came at a cost to the relationship between Archer and Tokiomi.
これは貴様の計らいか、金ピカ。
時読みめ、ゲスな真似を。
It's been at least 3 days since summoning Archer, and Tokiomi has scarcely even left his mansion, let alone played an active role in the war. So far, what we know about him is that he's confident and traditionalistic. He isn't stubborn, but he will stick to a strategy that he has envisioned, even if it means damaging the relationship with his servant. He won't deviate from that strategy, repercussions be damned. And above all else, He maintains a clear sense of pride as a mage and strives to present himself in a way that's distinguished and refined. There's only just enough here to discern a character, but there doesn't appear to be much else. He appears so seldom that there's almost no substance to what is already a very basic character. Even his motivation is one that is so simplistic, we don't even need to understand exactly what the root is to understand any more about him. Nothing has been inconsistent, but there is still room to learn more. Whether or not we will find more is another question entirely, however. Another day passes and Castor begins his attack from the river. Yeah, we're calling back to it. The problem has now grown far beyond his original estimate. Killing Castor is no longer a matter of regaining a command seal. The very existence of magic is at stake. Archer is the only one capable of stopping it, but he refuses to play second fiddle to Tokiomi. This is the first time Tokiomi has been met with a decision as decisive as this one. Previously, he's managed to minimize damage to his relationship. Now, his only chance at eliminating Castor will permanently earn him Archer's scorn and make it that much harder to cooperate. We see how quickly he tenses under pressure of the unexpected, compared to other masters, especially Kiritsugu, who seem to have a plan for every outcome. Tokiomi crumbles against the slightest opposition to plan, but before he can make a decision, Berserker appears to challenge Archer, as does Karya to Tokiomi. Once face to face, he's met with an unexpected question. Why did he send his daughter Sakura away to the Mato family?
愛娘の未来に幸あれと願ったまでのこと。秘伝を伝授し得るのは一人のみ。いずれか一人は凡俗に落とさねばならないというジレンマにな。いずれか一人の未来のためにもう一人が秘め持つ可能性を摘み取ってしまうなど。そんな悲劇を望む者がいるものか。
Here's where we really learn about Tokiomi's character. Much like Rin in Bladeworks, we see that the Tohsakas extol magecraft to an incredible degree. The very thought that even one of his children might grow up normal and magicless is a tragedy to him. He doesn't care that most human beings grow up without magic. He pays no mind to how Sakura feels or her experiences with the Matos. It might not even bother him. The intense and rigorous torment she's had to endure at such a young age means nothing to him, in contrast to a life without magic. Even the most basic family values and joys in life escape him because of this outlook. He's even aware of the possibility that he may fail to get the Grail this time, and he's perfectly content with the thought that his daughters would have to fight each other. His views towards Karya only accentuate that. As someone who walked away from the world of magecraft, Tokiomi describes him as an irresponsible traitor to both his family and magecraft. What's most interesting, however, is that this speaks arguably more about Rin's character in retrospect than it does about Tokiomi's. Growing up under the tutelage of someone who sees the joys of his daughters as mundane and enforces a great many responsibilities on her, how does that affect her views on someone like Shiro, who grew up learning magic as though it were an option? Tokiomi dispatches Karya not long before Saber destroys Castor. When he returns to his mansion the following morning, Kirei reports that his father was killed last night. Between this and the fiasco at the river, Tokiomi suggests a change in plan, which makes sense given how his plans have thus far backfired on him. The pressure is getting to him, and he no longer wants to take chances. By allying with the Ainsburn team, Tokiomi plans to eliminate both Berserker and Rider's Master, leaving only Archer and Saber thereafter. As mentioned, it still doesn't make sense how he knows Karya is alive. Before meeting with Irisfiel and Maya at the church, Tokiomi takes the last opportunity to see his wife and his daughter. With how close the end of the war is nearing, it's incredibly likely that he could die that night.
That's called foreshadowing.
And just as in line with his character, his last words regard Rin's responsibilities as a mage above all else. Not an I love you, not a kiss on the forehead, or even a hug, extolling rigorous tradition to the very end. Tokiomi is a very peculiar member of the supporting cast, not because he has such an interesting character with so much going on. Quite the opposite. He's not even supposed to. Ultimately, Tokiomi was betrayed not just by Kirei, but Archer as well. Understanding how they viewed him would also help us understand why they turned their backs on him. As early as episode 6, we learn that Archer is dissatisfied with his master and even finds his motivations very dull and tedious. What's more, Tokiomi seems to be the only character that Archer expresses boredom from. There are those who catch his eye, and others who he is directly disgusted by, but Tokiomi merely invokes boredom. Consider for a minute Archer's perspective to be the same as an audience member. There are many parallels between the dissatisfaction with him as a character and the kind of dissatisfaction Archer expresses. Despite his close relations to such an important character in Stay Night, he barely has anything going on. This same disconnection could also be described of Kirei. Because of Archer's influence over Kirei, it wouldn't be hard to imagine that he also feels no connection to Tokiomi for the same reason as Archer. Though his and Archer's delight and suffering likely come from two different places, but one thing at a time. Similar to Assassin and Karya, Tokiomi doesn't need an incredible amount of involvement for him to fulfill his role to the plot. There is nothing about him that could have been fleshed out more than he is now. Even his core motivation is described as something that wouldn't concern and might not be comprehensive to anyone but a mage.
根源への渇望は魔術師だけに固有のものだ。根源へと至る道のりとは、いわば世界の外側への逸脱だ。内側への興味しか持たない我々には、つまらない企てとしか理解できない。
確かに俺は我がにわたるこの宇宙をめでるだけで満たされている。根源とやらには何の関心もわかぬ。
Even though it's technically explained, it's not an explanation that the audience can gain anything from. We don't need to know what the root is to understand Tokiomi, because there is nothing integral to him that we'd even need to know. While it's true one could describe his involvement as lacking or disappointing, that is also the point. Tokiomi is a very basic character that has little going on beyond the most surface-level motivations. That is precisely the reason Archer found no entertainment to be gained, and no desire to remain loyal. Let's return to episode 10 again and examine Rin a bit closer. We see that she's very anxious to become a mage, likely a result of the responsibilities she's been expected to have. The episode shows us this, and she attempts jewel magic on her own, and that self-teaching is something she explores often. And further still by her enthusiasm to want to help her father in the coming war, ignorant of what it's really like. She even explores magic far beyond her and more dangerous than what she can handle. The core motivations we're familiar with from Bladeworks are all present and consistent with those in this episode. In fact, it could be her aversion to involving outsiders stemmed from her experience here, such as how the caster of this grail also involves outsiders for their own benefit. But that is just a guess with very little evidence to back it up. We also see her intelligence on display in this episode, given her enthusiasm to learn and expand her knowledge. This is especially present in her monologue at the very end of the episode. Rin, however, is still young. She hasn't felt the aftermath of the war and likely doesn't yet understand what it means to be the heir to the Tohsaka name, let alone the trials that come with those responsibilities. She may not even fully understand those responsibilities. Her views at such a young age are so naive that it reflects her ignorance of the Grail War. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that within 10 or even 6 years, she will likely begin to experience an even greater burden, and this is discounting the incredible emotional burden of living without a father or mother for the rest of her life thereafter. That's why I say her relationship with Tokiomi is incredibly important to her arc, because it is the loss of that relationship so early in her life that is the cause of this stress. There are so many sources of stress for her. The many sources of pressure from her responsibilities, whether as a mage, the head of her family, or a participant in the Grail War. For all of her posturing, the exaggerated elegance, and masquerading, she's far from perfect. She's far from elegant, and she makes mistakes. Not even small ones, some that result in hurting others, some that cost her one-time opportunities, powerful alliances, and chances to avoid betrayals. She tries to maintain her image, that while underneath, she's forgetful, overconfident, neglectful, and procrastinative, she does her best to at least appear the opposite on the surface. Yet even that is a trial. Between the weight of the responsibilities and expectations, it takes the entire anime before she breaks. Without someone to help her, without anyone in her life, without a family or a father, all she can do is pretend, and that's where Shiro comes in. That's what makes her relationship so much more important and meaningful than just another romance. After living 10 years in an empty household without a mother or a father, she desperately needs someone who can help alleviate this burden, someone who can help her manage the stress, someone who can fill the void in her life that the rest of her family had left. Someone like Shiro. But what I'm describing now is how I wanted her arc to be, rather than what actually happened. For one thing, if I'm to believe that this is how her arc is meant to be interpreted, there are few, if any, indications of the sources of her stress that aren't left entirely to inference. The most we see is the loss of her father, but we seldom see any correlation between things like becoming the head of the Tohsaka family, which, as far as we're aware, is a family that consists of her exclusively, and the myriad of mistakes that put Shiro and many others in danger, which should have been easily foreseeable and preventable to someone like Rin. And I don't mean to downplay how huge her father's death is to her, but it's not like the show doesn't downplay it either. If this really is how I'm meant to read her personal conflict, why is her relationship to her father touched on so seldom beyond the minor flashbacks in Season 1? Why doesn't she open up about her father's passing, and the emptiness it created as a payoff to her journey if Shiro truly is meant to be the shoulder for her to lean on? And most of all, why is her wish not to bring back her parents if that really is the source of the conflict in her story? Hell, that's a conflict in its own right. Wanting to win the war to bring back the parents you're still mourning and affected by many years later, and yet being forced to kill the person you love in order to do it. But that kind of conflict is nowhere to be found here because the anime isn't slightly self-aware of the story it could be telling. Few, if any, of her mistakes can be treated as character flaws. For example, despite being displayed as someone who always seeks growth, she seldom learns from her biggest mistakes. She leaves Archer at home on 4 separate occasions when he could have prevented disastrous outcomes. Not only is she aware of these mistakes, she seldom regrets them either. This line bothers me because it accentuates how little Rin cares about the consequences of her mistakes. If bad things happen due to a character's actions, the way to keep them sympathetic is either to have them learn from those mistakes, or at least acknowledge and regret them. If what Archer's saying here is correct, Rin doesn't do either. Not the numerous ways she endangers Shiro's life, not when she does nothing to prevent Archer's betrayal, not even when every student and staff member at her high school is hospitalized on her watch. She neither learns from nor regrets any of her mistakes, as though she's ignorant to the consequences, which makes it damn near impossible to believe when we're told that she's known about these mistakes all along. Another perfect example of this is how the series builds up her suspicion of Archer. On multiple occasions, with near baseless evidence, she suspects he might try to betray her, but she never tries to prevent him at the very last possible moment, and even motivates him to betray her more. And the only time she acts on those suspicions is the same episode she has every reason not to. What connects these decisions with the stress that she is supposedly grappling with? How does her repeated neglect of a soul-sucking bounded field, her disregard of her own servant's importance, passing on every viable alliance offered to her as though the answer were obvious, and intentional involvement of her true love in a literal death game connect in any way to the loss of her father? These unanswered questions practically destroy any validity to her story. The show never displays her biggest mistakes as one that she's constantly combating as the source of her arc's conflict, because there is no conflict to be found in her arc. Before Archer's betrayal, there's never a time when we see her grappling with the pressures of her responsibility. For all we're told in Season 1 at least, she really is as intelligent, perfect, and elegant as she's supposed to be, even though she isn't. Even Archer, someone who should know this is all an act, treats her like it isn't. And yet, Tokiomi also lacks an arc to speak of, but he was never written with the potential for one. Rin's arc was one that could have and should have added a lot to Unlimited Blade Works. The pressure of her life elevates the importance of her relationship with Shiro, especially as it builds up to the reveal of Kirei as her father's killer, and the source of that stress. Defeating him would have been an ideal climax, but it never became important beyond the most superficial background noise. Really think about that. Rin's arc had everything set up in her favor. It had plenty of emotional buildup, and more than enough reason to exist in this route. Yet because it was so poorly handled, the story missed many prime opportunities to involve and develop 2 other important characters that were instead wasted as mere plot devices, when it could have made Rin's journey so much more than what it was here. Tokiomi, though, can't have an unrealized arc when there wasn't one to begin with. He is a dull and boring one-note character, but he is also supposed to be. And despite this, he's written consistently. His motivations are comprehensive enough to understand him and his actions. Anything else to understand about him doesn't need to be. Rin Tohsaka constantly undermines her motivations, acts out of character repeatedly, makes decisions that are far too stupid for her to make, and she creates conflicts that could be avoided. And because Bladeworks never presents her as self-aware of these mistakes, her seemingly intelligent attitude only makes her come off as pretentious. It is so sad to me because once again there's no competition. This time, not because Zero has more of their respective character to offer than Bladeworks can. Quite the opposite. Rin's prominence and importance to her story gives her far more opportunities to shine much brighter as a character than Tokiomi. It doesn't take much at all to write a character far better than one literally intended to be boring. And yet, for all the opportunities that Bladeworks gives her, Rin is repeatedly shown to be inconsistent, uncharacteristically dumb, and desperately lacking in substance. Even her conflict with her father's murderer is one that is never important until the conclusion is spontaneously dropped on us. Worst of all, it makes the prequel episode almost completely meaningless, which is all the more sad because the prologue episode is actually quite well written on its own. But now it adds nothing new to her character or her story that the rest of the anime doesn't already cover. If anything, it's just a disappointing reminder that this could have been the setup for an incredible story that we never got. And now... I don't have a clever segue. Here's Ryder.